1980s. We were established in 1987. We produce natural catastrophe risk models. We also do software consulting, risk management consulting. Our models cover all catastrophe perils on a global scale. We have offices in 8 countries. All insurance and reinsurance companies are our clients. We have an extremely in-depth technical specialized team of professionals. Close to 100 of these professionals hold doctorate degrees in various sciences and disciplines. Our company invented natural catastrophe models. In the late 80s, they were first invented and publicized in the academic domain, in collaboration with academia. The milestone, the watershed event for the popularization of these models was the Hurricane Andrew event in 1992. From there on, a further progression of events followed: the Northridge earthquake in 1994, Hurricane Katrina and Rita in 2005. And over these years, the models have become more and more important for the industry. They began to be used widely for multiple tasks in the insurance, reinsurance, and financial industries. A few words about our team. We have a great team. We employ physical engineers, seismologists, geophysicists, meteorologists. You see here representatives of all physical sciences, as well as actuaries, economists, people with background in risk management. And of course, we have a lot of software developers because we build these catastrophe models into a commercial platform which we deliver to the industry. So if you think of the insurance and reinsurance industry in market segments and regions, and the market segments being commercial and homeowners insurance, broking, reinsurance, industry loss securities, then we cover all markets, all market segments, and all regions across the globe. All of the big companies, all of the big players are our clients. So now we will start talking about the models after this brief introduction of our company. We produce models for all natural catastrophe players across the whole globe. We cover all regions: North and South America, Europe and the Middle East, Asia Pacific, Australia, and New Zealand. Everywhere where an insurance market exists for writing and purchasing policy for catastrophe risk management, we have models and we have coverage. So our models are leveraged across the entire value chain of the industry. If we think of the value chain on the demand side, coming from the individual policyholders, whether they're homeowners, individuals, or corporates, through the insurers who write the insurance policies for these homeowners, the reinsurers, which provide reinsurance coverage for the primary insurers, and the brokers who put the two together, as well as the financial institutions, which provide capital reserves. Across this entire value chain, our models are used and leveraged. Our models give the users and the clients valuable technical scientific information. They tell you where catastrophes are likely to occur physically, geographically, what are their footprints. They also tell you how intense they will be. And intensity in various physical sciences is measured with flood depth for flooding, wind speed, earthquake magnitudes, etc. But they tell you how intense the catastrophe will be. They also tell you how frequent they will be on an annual basis, how many events you can expect, and what the expected damage will be, the physical damage, and the losses. What will be the monetary value of the losses? These physical damage and monetary value of losses is estimated probabilistically with large Monte Carlo simulations. So we assign probabilistic weights to these outcomes. And here is a picture, a schema of a model, of the models that we build. We have three general components of these models. The first component that we will look at is the hazard component. This is a component which uses statistical Monte Carlo principles to generate physical events and their intensities. Then we have an engineering component where we estimate the damage to physical structures, both commercial, homeowners, public sector. And lastly, we have a financial component where this physical damage is converted into financial monetary losses for the people who use the models. And to enable all of this, we have the exposure data, or the data at risk, which is prepared by our clients and it's imported in the platform. So on the first component, the event generation component, if you think a little bit about go back a little bit to your knowledge of mathematics and statistics, this is in practice a large Monte Carlo simulation. To simulate the footprints and the paths of catastrophic events, in this example, here we see the paths of hurricanes in North America, we generate thousands and hundreds of thousands of such events. This is the Monte Carlo simulation. Each of these events has a range of physical parameters which are recorded in our platform, and later we will see how these parameters can be used for urban resilience planning. A new paradigm or a new dimension in the modeling of the physical hazard is the incorporation of physical sciences in parallel with the traditional statistical approach to event generation. So incorporation of physical sciences means that if you build a simulation based on historical statistical data, and we would call this first generation of catastrophe models, now with incorporating physical and environmental sciences on the genesis of the event, track motion, intensification, transition from water to surface, we enrich the generation of these events and make their realization in the models a lot more realistic. Now, to convert the modeling of the hazard into damage and eventually into monetary losses, it is necessary to account for the exposure at risk. And we model and support all kinds of exposures, from your average residential home to industrial facilities, corporate facilities, commercial structures, such as shipping, aviation, rail, auto, and offshore. Now, given that we have created and generated the hazard of a catastrophic event and having knowledge of the underlying exposure at risk, we put these two together and we create a damage estimation for the risk. In this module, we take the physical measure of the hazard. For example, for atmospheric perils such as tropical cyclones, hurricanes, typhoons, this is wind speed. We take the physical measure of wind speed at a very low granularity, as low as 50 meters per 100 meters. And this is important when we talk about planning and resilience. And we couple this, we map it with something we called damage vulnerability functions. We couple it with a damage ratio of the risk. So we translate the physical intensity of the hazard into a damage ratio, an expected damage ratio for the risk. And all of this that we discuss is done on a probabilistic, very large Monte Carlo simulation basis. And in the financial component of the model, we translate the physical damage into monetary losses to the user of the model. Insurers, reinsurers, brokers, financial institutions, public sector institutions, both federal, local, and municipal. So how this works together, here is animation that puts all of this discussion together. You will see first we start with generating a physical event of the hazard. Let's say this is a typhoon. We generate a physical replica of a typhoon event with all of its physical parameters that you can imagine: wind speeds, path, landing on landing segment. And then once we have the footprint of this event, we compute intensity at a very granular level, as low as 50 meters and 100 meters resolution. So we have very large global grids where for hundreds of thousands of events, we have an intensity calculation at a very granular level. Then we overlay this intensity with exposure, and you saw how we translate intensity into damage. So that gives you the expected damage for every grid. And from the expected damage, using financial calculations and insurance policy terms and conditions, we estimate losses. So from here, immediately, you can see that data of granular gridded intensity and losses can be used for planning in the public sector, and as it is by a number of agencies with which we work. So the output of the model is something that we call an exceedance probability curve. For those who are into statistics, this is the reverse of the cumulative density function. It's also known in statistics as a survivability function. This is 1 minus the cumulative density function, or 1 minus the cumulative density probability. So for every estimated loss, we have an exceedance probability of loss. And of course, that curve has an average, which is the mean, the expectation of the whole simulation. It is the most likely outcome. So with this, I hope I presented a general view of what is a catastrophe model And now we will look how these model results are interpreted and validated, both in industry and in public sector. So the most important validation, of course, is versus historical events, versus what actually happens on the ground. And this historical validation is performed by obtaining actual exposures, both of the industry exposures of our clients, as well, which includes private, commercial, public sector risks, running these exposures in our models and comparing the results to what actually happens on the ground, when and where there is a catastrophic event. So this work is also done in collaboration with universities and institutes, both in vetting the exposure, vetting the physical characteristics of the buildings, of the risks. We work with the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. We work with the Natural Hazard Engineering Research Infrastructure Initiative. So these are multi-institutional, this is a multi-institutional initiative, the validation of the models with actual historical losses. And here is a technical picture of this is how this actually occurs. We collect historical loss data, and in the picture this is indicated by the red line. This is historical losses accumulated at various granularities, and against these historical losses we run our models with our simulations, and from all of these simulations we find the ones that are best matches. There's a statistical method called maximum likelihood. So we look at this methodology and we select the best simulated model matches which reflect the actual physics of the historical event and the monetary losses of the industry. And this is how we improve and calibrate the models. Now, when you put all of our models together and the global insured and insurable exposure, we produce something which is called global insurance losses. And here again, we perform validation and we observe our model losses versus the historical losses. And here on the picture, you see that in the last few years, the modeled losses are very, very close to the actual historical losses. And the growing trend, the trend of increasing losses, is evident in the data. Our current estimation of global annual average loss, that is the most likely loss that can occur on a global level from multiple catastrophes, all modeled catastrophes, is about $133 billion. And it is very close to the actual losses experienced by industry. What are the key factors in this growth, in this growing trend of losses? Of course, it is exposure growth. And exposure growth in particularly vulnerable areas, near coastlines, near estuaries. The effects of climate change on the atmospheric perils is also a factor. The natural variability of climate is a factor. And then, of course, there are man-made loss drivers, inflation and social inflation, property inflation being the most significant one. So the probability of experiencing a 200 billion global loss in the next decade is not unthinkable. It shouldn't be unthinkable both for industry, for public sector, for risk management, both in the commercial and public sector domains. In our models, we estimate such a loss to have an exceedance probability of 90%. So this is a very high exceedance probability for such a large global loss. So now we will look at a few ideas and a few examples based from our practices on how the models can be leveraged for urban resilience planning. So first of all, we will revise a little bit how the models are leveraged in the private sector and why this also contributes to urban resilience. As mentioned, in the whole insurance market value chain, the models perform and satisfy important and valuable tasks. First of all, they're used for risk selection. That is, from large populations of risks, defining which risks are insurable, how to categorize them, how to group them in lines of businesses, in categories, in risk classes. So risks are selected and classified using our models. The composition of these groups and lines of businesses and risk classes is performed on a very large scale, and it's performed on an annual basis. So this is also done with our models. Very importantly, the coverage of the risk, the construction of the insurance or reinsurance policy, how much of the expected loss, how much of the expected damage will the insurer or reinsurer cover with their policy. This is also used in our model. Once this coverage is determined, it has a technical price. This is the insurance premium. The insurance premium itself is comprised, of course, of technical price and market sentiments, but the technical price really comes from the model. And historically, this was done with various actuarial models based on claims. Now the catastrophe models have really found the catastrophe models have found a very actual, very acute implementation in this sector. And of course, all of these and coverage, risk selection, and technical price is calibrated by the industry on an annual basis. Again, the models with their simulations are used in this function. So from the very simple insurance risk, which is a single building, a single home, a single commercial facility, a single industrial facility, which has its policy terms and conditions, it has its technical price of risk, to the large, complicated and complex portfolio of risk, which are in the millions of risks. The models are used for pricing and risk management. And the effective use of the models does a number of things for urban resilience. It provides, first of all, a technical price of risk, which is based on science, on physical and actuarial science. More so and less so on sentiments. Also provides a technical price which is not variable from year to year and subject to external influences. This is very important for the market. And once you have a solid technical price of risk, then new construction, real estate purchasing, all of these functions are possible and they can thrive in an urban environment. As you know, no large infrastructure projects, no small infrastructure projects, single homes are possible to be built, to be purchased, to transfer ownership without insurance. So the technical price of insurance, which our models provides, really facilitates the market and the resilience of the market. The same is also set for risk management, catastrophe risk management. The accumulation of this risk, of putting together thousands and millions of insurance policies with their underlying catastrophe risk, requires diligent risk management. And this risk is managed through purchasing of reinsurance, through purchasing of catastrophe treaties, other instruments on the financial markets. Again, this risk transfer is based on a technical price of risk, on the accumulation of multiple prices of multiple risks on very large scales. This is practically impossible to accomplish without a catastrophe model. So the function of purchasing reinsurance, finding capital to reserve from a financial institution, is practically impossible without the catastrophe models, quantitative catastrophe models. So here, models contribute to the stability of the insurer. The insurer is able to provide stable risk management for its portfolio based on quantitative science and physical sciences. So now we come to the public sector. The credibility of the models, as we saw from the beginning of the talk, has been established from comparing model results, from comparing model results to actual historical events. So once we have established the credibility of the models in the public sector, various public sector agencies are able to use model metrics to assess and plan progress on climate adaptation initiatives and efforts. One example of this is the adoption of common risk metrics. As you see, our models produce a physical parameter at a very high granularity. For example, flood depth. At 100-meter resolution, 50-meter resolution on a national or global depth, we have the simulated flood depth of catastrophic flood events. So that parameter informs local municipal agencies and risk managers on the intensity of the risk towards they are exposed. And from there, they can also have access to the monetary losses for their infrastructure. Both the physical parameters and the monetary losses are used as instruments in planning of resilience initiatives. So our models provide data and information for communities and municipalities to accurately assess catastrophe risk. This data is provided directly by us through third parties, brokers, etc. But armed and fortified with such data, urban risk managers are able to access the intensity of the risk, the frequency of the risk, and the monetary loss. This helps to reinforce planning and selection of adaptation policies and options. It also helps and enables monitoring and evaluation of progress on an annual basis, on multi-annual basis, long-term basis. And some such initiatives are building of flood defenses, reducing of fire cover. So the definition of the hazard at the very granular municipal level is a very important tool for the municipal urban catastrophe risk manager. And as you know, in the large cities, both in the United States and in Europe, in other places, there are such positions, there are such departments, catastrophe risk management, which are tasked exactly with the development of plans and remediation measures to address natural catastrophe events. Those departments, those managers use the physical and monetary outputs of our models. Wherever we have collaboration between the public and private sector on insurance policies, such as insurance pools that we have in Florida and California, the models can be used to provide insurance incentives for the policyholders, such as adding and building defense and remediation measures to their properties on the very small scale, from the individual homeowner to the very large scale of large corporate, industrial, and public sector campuses. Fuel reduction was also mentioned for the areas where wildfire is a peril, and the events that are taking place as we speak in the state of California are really a testament to this. Our models are used to estimate the intensity of the fire hazard, the spatial distribution of the fire hazard, the monetary loss, the price of the expected price of the risk. The models are also used in public sector and financial institutions collaboration to mobilize capital, investment, and innovation to advance climate resilience at scale. And lastly, I will mention that the models are always used to increase the resilience of the built environment through constant update of building codes and building environment defenses to remediate, to defend against acute climate shocks and chronic economic stressors. With this, I will conclude my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and I will be glad to answer and address questions.
Thank you so much. This is a great presentation, very informative. And I'm sure our students will agree that was the perfect introduction to this topic. There are already 3 questions in the chat. I'd be happy to read them. And then if there are more questions, feel free to add them to the chat, or you can raise your hand and we're going to transfer the questions to Ivelin. The first question that we received was from Melba. Melba asked, given the non-stationary given the non-stationarity of climate data due to anthropogenic climate change, how do you account for the potential divergence of your Monte Carlo simulations probability distributions from observed trends? And then, are you observing any unexpected or significant deviations? And if so, how are you adapting your models to address this?
Yeah, thank you. This is very, very important question. And this is a question that is on the mind of physical scientists across the globe at the universities and government agencies. This in hazard modeling is addressed through transition from statistical models which model intensity hazard based on statistical data and physical statistical data, through models which, through physical models, physical atmospheric models, which now incorporate the physical parameters of the hazard. And in the modeling, in these Monte Carlo simulations, we give bigger weight to recent observations. In a traditional statistical model, where you have a static understanding or a static concept of climate, a stationary concept of climate, why one might assume that the statistics and the variables over, let's say, a measurement of 200 years are constant. In other words, the statistics that we have of hurricane landfalls in 1825 or 1824, 200 years ago, have the same weight as the data of 2024. Now, in climate-ready models which account for near-present climate, the observations of the last 5-10 years have much bigger weight than long-term historical observations. So this is one of the methods to account. And the second is the physical model, the physical modeling of events from first principles, from first scientific principles.
There are other questions in the same vein. I'm gonna read one more question from the chat, and then I'm gonna let our students who have their eyes up ask in person. The second question that I have here is from Claudia. Claudia asked, based on the reflections you shared on how the risk model incorporates hazard and exposure, I was wondering, could you clarify even how the component of vulnerability is accounted for? Thank you.
Yeah, so vulnerability, we, from engineering experience, from first engineering principles, we create something that we call damage functions. This is a mapping function between hazard intensity. Let's look at hurricanes. Hazard intensity is measured in wind speed, and this is at a very granular level, at 100 by 100 meters resolution. So for various wind speed, we have statistical mapping functions which map the wind speed to damage, physical damage of the risk, and this is expressed as percent damage of the total. And this is done, we have dozens of thousands of these damage functions, because these are by risk class, by construction, by occupancy. So a single home will have a very different damage function than a commercial steel building, a very different function from a industrial facility, an airport. So we have thousands of these functions. They map the intensity of the hazard and the percent damaged of the risk. And they're very, very individual. So this is done through engineering science. We employ a large team of structural engineers, which which with doctorate degrees, and this is their specialty. This is what they develop for the model.
I have a question, but maybe I will wait for my question, and we're gonna let Saki ask his question, and then Firdavs, and then we're gonna go back to the chat.
Thank you, Marta. Thank you for the nice and comprehensive presentation. My name is Saki. I'm from the United Nations University here in Belgium. Also, I'm pursuing a master's degree on global health and risk management. So that was a very interesting lecture for me. I was wondering how often the catastrophe modeling is suggested to be applied in sectors or in places, because with the continuous changes in climate change or socioeconomic changes around us. So do we need to have a like a regular catastrophe modeling, or is it like annually, biannually, or how it works? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you again. Very, very good questions. You seem you're really up to date on all the important topics in the industry. First of all, catastrophe models have come a long way. As you saw in the picture, they have struggled and they have gained reputation and they have proved themselves over a period of 30 years. So now in insurance and reinsurance, none of the technical functions can be performed without catastrophe models. These functions before were performed with something called actuarial models, which, back to our previous discussion, are statistical models based on frequency and severity of claims. So these are completely stationary statistical models which only model the occurrence of claims. They have no physical background. So from that level of the industry, for 30 years, we went into using of these physical models, which model the physical hazard and model the vulnerability of the structures. Now, technical pricing, risk management, selection, underwriting, all of these functions are performed with our models. Climate change now brings everything to a new dimension. Now, how often do you update the models? In principle, for a quantitative risk model, whether it's financial or physical, there are two reasons fundamentally to update the model. The first one is a break in science, a breakthrough in science. Let's say we're using a specific model, a specific methodology to model the movement of a hurricane storm, its spatial movement from the ocean to the land. And a new methodology appears in, let's say it originates in academia, which is proven revolutionary. So that's a motivation to update the model, adopt a new methodology, new science. And the second motivation is new data, of course. New data, new historical events, new data, which when you calibrate the models, gives you a new understanding of the model. So these are the two fundamental motivations for updating models. Now, given that we're operating in a new regime, one can only guess what is the optimal frequency for model update. But it's certain that it will be higher than in the previous 30 years. If in the early 2000s, it was acceptable to update a model every 10 years, we can probably assume that now that will be 3 years. But again, the motivation, my view is the motivation has to come from science and from data, things occurring.
Thank you very much. There are several questions that are connected to this. Firdavs, is your question sort of connected to this, or should I fish from the chat something connected?
Thank you, Marta. No, my question is not. Well, I had the second question related to this in terms of climate change and to what extent Monte Carlo modeling methodology is relevant for the unknown, really. And I got the answer to some extent from Ivelin. Thank you. But my first question was on project finance related. When financial institutions finance long-term infrastructure using project finance methods. Now, did you come across in your professional life whose responsibility is that to procure hazard risk management? Is it the project company or the financial institution? They do it themselves in order to protect their own business. Does it make sense? Question.
It makes sense, and it's actually both, more and more. The financial institution, the project manager at the financial institution, the lending manager, let's say it's a loan. The lending managers, the loan managers are more and more using risk scores, catastrophe model-based risk scores,
Right.
to evaluate the risk, the catastrophe risk of the asset. And this is done from all the way from a simple home, when you need to take a home loan, a mortgage, to financing of large infrastructure projects. And the larger the project, the risk, of course, is larger. So at the financial institutions, the loan managers are using the models to create scores, risk-based scores, and the score is based on the expected loss and its variability. On one side, on the other side, the municipal public sector agency managers are doing the same. They may be doing it through consultants and brokers. They may be using various models, but they have a view of risk. They have a view of risk, a view of catastrophe risk, and when they negotiate, these views are reconciled.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
So we have two more questions related to data. The first one is from Enrique in the chat. And Enrique asked, during the event generation stage, do you take into account historical human activities such as land and environment degradation, hazardous real estate, etc.? And for the damage assessment, you mentioned the financial valuation of physical damage. Would it be possible to also include social damage due to physical losses? There is another question about data. Maybe, I don't know if you want to address this, or I could read both so you can maybe see the connection between the two. Agatha asked, I would like to know a bit more about the data used for validation and this data and data quality control. Data acquisition can become a complex discussion point, but I would like to know Ivelin's opinion on how we can improve open data for public and private sectors. There is also a question from Ankita, but I think it's still connected and you
Yes,
sort of
maybe
already answered it.
let me answer the first one, probably then I have to remind
I'd
of
be
the
happy to read
second
it.
question.
Sure.
Okay, the first question. The models account for, this is something we call land use, land cover. We simply model, or we take a snapshot, a physical snapshot of the geographical state of the land. So we have various land covers. We have urban, suburban, forested, mountain, rivers, river depth. So the models take account of this. It's not necessarily, we don't grade it whether it's a degradation or not, but some of them are due to human activity, such as building a city, building a suburb. So the models do account for this.
Thank you. The second question is, unless you have anything else to want to add. I didn't want to interject too fast. Would you like me to repeat Agatha's question about
Yes, please.
data validation? Agatha would like to know a little bit more about the data validation, or better, the data used for validation and data quality control. She mentioned that acquisition can become a complex discussion point, but I would like to know Ivelin's opinion on how we can improve open data for public and private sectors.
Yes, there are a number of initiatives which are already on the way. There is an initiative, it's called Global Earthquake Model, which, for example, which contains exactly what it says, a global earthquake model. This model is built and updated by a number of academic institutions who are also contributors. It's open source. Everyone can validate it and use it. And I expect there's also such models for the atmospheric risks. So there are a number of open source models which are available to the public, to academic institutions that people can use. We contribute to these models. This is one way in which we contribute. A second way, which is a little more industry-based, is we work with the other industry players, both modelers and insurance companies, on reaching common standards for describing exposure at risk. These are the building, roads, bridges, etc., etc. Having common standards and data formats facilitate risk transfer. It is as having a common language, common mathematical methodology. So this is a second initiative that improves understanding. And lastly, we provide risk to the public sector specifically. We provide risk advisory and data, occasionally pro bono in times of catastrophic events, which helps with risk assessment, understanding the hazard, understanding the nature of the hazard, the exposure. Especially, we've done a number of projects in the developing world where we have provided, and others too, we provide pro bono such estimates. So there are quite a few initiatives which are collaborations between public sector and industry, which aim to improve the understanding of the model, access to the models, understanding of the risk. Also in that group, I will mention projects with the World Bank on modeling of catastrophe bonds in the developing world. This is also another such example.
Thank you, Ivelin. There are two questions that are sort of connected to this. The first asks, this is Shuda. How accessible is the insurance for the vulnerable communities of hazard-prone areas, and how is it ensured if any additional measures are taken at all? This question is connected with Amy Sierra Martin's question. Are all insurance companies for profit? As insurance is a requirement to own a home, and there doesn't seem to be a limit on home owning extravagance, and the cost to rebuild is shared by the whole community. Does the model predict a threshold where areas are no longer financially viable to rebuild? And would insurance/construction companies be forthcoming with that information? And is the mental stress of community destruction measured? I think there is a lot of questions in Amy question, but
so first on the second part of the question, we're talking about risk selection and classifying risks. The models don't have thresholds because these are subjective. The models evaluate the risk with monetary and physical numbers. Risk selection, threshold, acceptance to write or not to write. These are highly proprietary and highly particular to the insurer, reinsurer, the business writer. So our job is to give the most accurate, the best quantitative estimate of physical and financial risk. We're a modeling agency. We're a quantitative modeler. We do not set these selections and the classifications of the risk. The selection, classification, binding of the risk is done by the people who underwrite the risk. Our job is to be an independent, quantitative, scientific modeler. And it's very important to emphasize the independence of our work in the sense that it is not, our focus is on physical modeling, both hazard and structural, and representation of market terms and conditions. In that sense, we're independent of other risk factors which are on the market and in the companies. So this is what our clients and this is what the industry needs. On the first question, for low-income homes and for highly distressed areas, such as Florida, such as California, there are a number of public sector initiatives, public-private sector collaborations and initiatives, which are basically insurance pools. And I encourage you to read about the insurance pools in Florida and in California, which provide insurance coverage to homeowners, small business owners, which are in highly vulnerable regions. Yes, such insurance pools, such public sector pools exist, both in the US and globally. There's such in the Caribbean, there's such agricultural initiatives in Africa as well, in Asia. So in Turkey as well, we have collaborated. So the public sector agencies and the public sector in general, of course, has a very strong interest and very strong initiative to facilitate insurance coverage, because as we said, without insurance, nothing gets built, nothing gets started. Without insurance, owners of businesses and homes have to cover the full loss. This can lead to bankruptcies, this can reduce home ownership, and etc. So it has tremendous shock potential for economic shock on large scale. So there is a mutual interest and a mutual benefit in these collaborations between public sector and industry.
There is a question related to how insurance markets may perceive or how they could act with the information that you provide. And then there is another question that I'm going to wait on, but that question is going to allow us to bridge the conversation towards nature-based solutions. The question from Ilse is, I'm curious about the reactions of insurance markets to these risk models. You mentioned the use of these hazard models to incentivize property owners to build in more resilient manner, I imagine might be a typo, to their properties. Given many recent reports of insurance companies completely withdrawing from certain risk-prone areas, especially wildfire-prone areas of California, how do you balance the risk to insurance companies with the accessibility of insurance to vulnerable communities? I think this is probably not the work of your company, but maybe you want to comment on this anyways.
Yeah. So what I can comment on the first side of the question. As we discussed, the models, of course, had to, and they have earned their credibility and place in the market over a period of time. They've started from something new, something which was not known, not well understood, to being well accepted across the entire industry, to the effect that business simply cannot be done without these models. So the models had to fight the model. The people who build the models, the company who build the models, the advocates for the models had to work very hard, advocate, convince, explain very hard to get the models to where they are. And again, the models are quantitative risk models. The decisions on this the decisions that are made are proprietary. What in the second part of the question is about business philosophy, risk management philosophy, underwriting philosophy of an insurance or reinsurance company. The models do not define the risk philosophy and the underwriting philosophy of a private company. They quantify the risk. They give you the optimal scientific physical foundation for the risk. They do not set classes, standards, and financial risk management philosophies. This is in the domain of the people who write the business. But my argument is that, and the reason why, I am doing this talk with great pleasure, and thank you to Marta, is that the models give you a scientific, unbiased in the sense from other external factors, scientific, independent, unbiased, quantitative risk foundation to take decisions, to make decisions. In this sense, they provide transparency and stability because they're quantitative, they're based on numbers. We have model outputs that, as we discussed in the previous case, a negotiation between a financial institution and a public sector agency on project finance loans. These are numbers that are provided by an independent agency, by a modeler. And we stand behind that numbers. They can be in the public domain, they can be private to the negotiation. That's there. That's a decision of these parties, but they're independent numbers. They're not the numbers which an actuary or a financial specialist at one of the institutions has estimated. They're independent numbers. In that sense, we provide transparency and stability.
Thank you, Ivelin. Before I go to Paul's question on the connection with nature-based solution, I wanted to ask you, these models are very helpful. They really are impressively sophisticated, and they have been improving over time to very high resolution, and they could be really, really helpful to a lot of public entities. What could be options to have access to those models, meaning to have access to these resources that I imagine can be very expensive to have access to? But I'm thinking, for example, in our university, we are developing a center for a resilience innovation incubator, for example. And many of the communities that are collaborating with us would be so happy to have this type of models. We develop similar models in academia, but sometimes the data used might be maybe less high resolution, perhaps for certain type of hazards. This brings me also to the question of data acquisition and how hard it is to continuously updating the data. So there are, if you allow me in this question, package two questions. One is how difficult it is to keep updating the data and how do you source your data? And the second is, what is your vision in relation to possible support to the public sector in terms of access to this information? Could they afford it? Can this information be shared? And I'm thinking about this more in terms of projections. When catastrophe models started, you are the expert. I'm just inferring from my limited knowledge, but when catastrophe models started, we were not in such a dramatic place of the curve in terms of climate change projections, and now things are getting worse and worse and really fast. So maybe in the future, we might want to think about partnerships between private and public sector in terms of addressing severe socioeconomic problems. So any thoughts you might have in terms of, or speculations about how this connection between public and private could take place, and maybe a comment before that about the challenge of data acquisition for your own company to try to create and build such strong models.
Yeah, absolutely, Martin. Yeah, I can refrain from speculations. I say only things as they see them, as they are real. But on the first question, data. So data, we obtain data from vendors. We use commercial data, so we purchase data. We also we have, as you can imagine, we have trusted relationships with our clients. We have clients for 30 years, for 20 years. So with non-disclosure agreements, very carefully, very stringent and strong non-disclosure agreements, we work with clients. We have data from clients, and that is back to the point about the update of the models. The two motivations being new science and new data. So it's very important that there's public domain data, which everyone has access to, commercial data we purchase, and private data through developing trusted relationship with clients. We work with such data. On the second, we actually have such an initiative. We have such a team which focuses on public sector partnerships. And I'll say a few things. First of all, first on the public sector and academic partnerships, we work with a number of universities on model development. And Marta, we can work together and meet and discuss by email or in person about how these partnerships are formulated. It's based on our interests and your interests, but yes, we do partner and collaborate with universities on model development and data for many years. As you can imagine, we employ 100 PhD, doctor degree people. All of them have relationships and collaborations with universities. So for us, that relationship is very important, it's very active, and it's constantly taking place. With the public sector, we have both Verisk and our company has a public sector business. One thing that we do is we have our model examined and validated and registered with public sector agencies. The state of Florida, the state of California, North Carolina have agencies and commissions which examine the models and approve them by use in the industry. So we do that more actively than, I would say, more actively than our competitors. We also have a number of public sector projects with municipalities and public sector agencies, which we provide model data. And I think when we discuss this here, I think my impression is that such data is used, my knowledge is that such data is used exactly for starting, financing, approving large infrastructure projects for remediation, such as flood defenses. So such partnerships are taking place with the public sector.
Thank you.
And
yeah.
I actually expect this to be a growing business exactly for the reasons that you spoke.
Yeah. Yes, I'm sure because there is a really huge need, and every time we interview or we interact with municipalities or regional planning agencies, they indicate their need for granular data related to their area to make decisions about risk reduction interventions.
And here I will add that public sector agencies, municipalities obtain such data, if not directly from us, from consultants and brokers which used our models. So if you work with a municipality, with the risk hazard or catastrophe risk management department in a large city, and they have catastrophe model data maps, let's say a flood map, or a wind intensity map, or a fire map, if they have not obtained it directly from us, because to produce the map, you have to have the exposure, run the model, etc. If one option they have is to do it with us through a consulting project, or if you see this data and it's not directly from the model vendors, they have obtained it from a consulting company which uses our models.
Thank you. This discussion about planning for risk reduction links us to Paul's question. So in an effort to bridge the modeling of disaster risk with the topic of the winter school, which is sustainable solutions and in particular nature-based solutions, Paul asked, could you share insights into the sentiment and current discussion within your sector and the insurance industry concerning the emergence of nature-based solutions and the contemporary support on international policy level, particularly given the fact that nature-based solutions effectiveness for a specific disaster risk reduction goal is often harder to measure than traditional measures. Could you share some thoughts?
I think, yeah, I understand the question, and I've read a number of publications. I think this is a question for practitioners in the insurance industry more than to us, the modelers. But I see that the insurance industry and the financial industry is both financing and insuring such solutions. I've read about a number of projects. So I think it is taking place. What is the consequence and the magnitude and the importance of these? I will not be able to comment, but I'm aware that such a taking place.
I have a question in relation to this. Does your company compare scenarios with different types of infrastructure? So for example, does your company would it be able to produce a scenario without the nature-based solution and a scenario with the nature-based solutions to show the implications of planning? Is that something also that happens?
Yeah, that is actually the right question. We can, so now we're talking about the exposure at risk. We model various defenses and remediation measures. And it's a very long list. There are flood defenses, sewer defenses, enhancements to building structures for wind prevention. So those are building and urban characteristics which are in the exposure. You can run the models without them, which will give you one view of risk, one view of loss, and you can run the models with them, which will give you a different view of risk and loss. With the remediation and defense measures, of course, they all work to reduce loss, to reduce expected loss. So the difference between these two is the impact. Yes, we can do this, but this is more for physical actions, such as flood walls, for example. Now, for a nature-based solution, because we model hundreds of these remediation and defense measures, I have to take a look if we model any of these. I cannot immediately answer. If you maybe give me an example, a nature-based solution will be, let's take New York City.
Yeah.
What would be a nature-based
So
solution?
something that was explored in your city was oyster wall to protect some parts of Manhattan from flooding, or consider, for example, cities in warmer climates or areas in warmer climates, so mangrove forests, or in mountainous regions, the reforestation of very high slope areas that would also work in terms of avalanche risk. There is a lot of, at the urban level, there are a lot of nature-based solutions in terms of flood reduction, using sponge capabilities of wetland or habitat reconstruction, essentially. I have some thoughts about this, but I wanted to hear your...
Yeah, we definitely model wetland. So this is a more technical question. Let's say we have a list of 200 remediations, which you can model with or without, and the remediations decrease the risk, decrease the loss. So it's a matter of going through the risk and really marking what we can and we cannot model at the moment. But I expect as these become more used, more prevalent, as they become part of urban infrastructures, we will be adding them to the model.
I think, Ivelin, I think I'm going to ask to fix an appointment to speak with you about this, because this is really a hot topic in the research that we are doing, and we are trying to figure out how to integrate nature-based solutions in decision-making in a way that takes into account the benefits of the nature-based solutions. And I think the work of your company might be one of the missing links in the discussion between the public sector and the research related to nature-based solutions. So I will email you after this event, not only to thank you, but also to maybe invite you for a further conversation. But thank you for this answer. There is a follow-up question from Shuda. She asks, first of all, she thanks you for clarifying the independence of the organization's role. And she also wanted to ask, how are outcomes of the physical risks incorporated in the quantitative modeling to contribute towards a comprehensive outcome for insurance packages to be offered for at-risk populations? Are the probabilities modeling outcomes of risks and losses shared with the other, in parentheses, interdisciplinary parties for holistic development towards collective sustainability goals? Are there any negative externalities to these insurances and modeling implementations? Any?
Okay, first part of the question is easy. Second part is very difficult. So on the easy part, how we estimate the physical damage to a risk, let's say a simple building, we estimate the physical damage as a simulation of scenarios, let's say thousands of scenarios. Each damage is expressed as a percentage of the value of the risk. So let's say you can have 100 scenarios and the value the damage can vary between 10% and 50%. Let's say the risk is valued at 100 million, 100,000 at 100. So you will have 100 scenarios with damage between 10% and 50%, 10 and 50. So these will be 100 points. And then on these points, we also model the insurance policy or the reinsurance policy. We apply it. It's not difficult. limits, deductibles, shares, facultatives, etc. And that gives you the monetary loss. So it's applying damage to a risk value and applying the policy on the estimated loss. And it's all probabilistic with probability weights. And you can say, you see both the full simulation of the model, hundreds of thousands of points, or you can see summary statistics, expected values, standard deviations, etc. That's the easy part of the question. The second part, maybe would you be able to condense it and simplify it a little?
So I think the final part of the question is whether there are negative externalities to this type of modeling, and I imagine I'm interpreting the question here to modeling for insurance, if there is any possible negative externality that you can think of.
Well, even if I think of negative externalities, I'm not sure I would be willing to share them. But in all honesty, yeah, it's a quantitative risk model. And for those of you who, for those who use quantitative risk models, know that the construction of view of risk is a combination of using the models, understanding the situation, and understanding the business. So to generalize, maybe I will say not only for these models, but generally for quantitative mathematical risk models, the danger, the externality is of using the model without understanding the context and taking model results out of context with minimal understanding of the business, the situation that we're modeling. And this conclusion I have from my experience long before working in catastrophe models. When model results are used without understanding, that's a big risk.
Yeah.
On the other hand, also, the fact that these are quantitative models give you very precise, very accurate number. Again, if you lack this understanding, a practitioner may become very confident in the outcomes. You know, one has to remember that there is uncertainty, there is risk. These are modeled results. They have to be treated like this. So I guess being overly confident is a risk in itself.
Yeah. This is a really, from my perspective, a very enlightening and interesting talk. I wonder if you have any parting words for our students, if you have any thoughts about possible areas of growth for them, recommendations. If Ivelin, I wanted to share with you all students. Evelyn shared with us numerous resources, and we posted them online. Is there anything else you would like to add and share with us?
Thanks. It was my pleasure to be with you to have this discussion. Very good questions. I'm really impressed by the questions. It is as if you have been doing this for a long while. You know, the questions are as good as our smartest clients. Overall, I'll say when it comes to quantitative and risk modeling, with all limitations, with all understanding, doing a job, running a project, starting a business or public sector initiative, it's better with the models than without the models, all in all.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. I agree, we have really great students, and they are all, one feature in these students, if you have a chance to see their bios, is that we have a lot of idealists and they're very passionate. So I guess passion always drives curiosity, and this is a huge asset for us as a winter school, because we learn from each other, but also hopefully for the planet when our students go out in the world. They're going to do great things. And I think your contribution was really helpful for us to gain additional knowledge and perspective, and I'm very grateful for your participation. So thank you very much for coming to our winter school.
You're welcome, my pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ivelin.
Thank you.
Yes, I think there is a round of applause, even if you cannot hear it, but everybody is clapping in their mind.
No, thank you. It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Bye. I hope you enjoyed Evelin's presentation. I really wanted to provide an alternative perspective to the discussions we are having, and it's very valuable to have the point of view of the private sector. If it's okay, I would suggest maybe a 5-minute break, because you absorbed a lot of information, and then we're going to come back and have a little chat. I have some ideas for the rest of the class, but I want to give you a moment to breathe first. Maybe let's take 5 minutes, and we're going to come back at 40. Okay? Bye.